The Armistice Day Storm hit the Great Lakes with conditions that did not match the warnings. Crews planned for rough weather, nothing unusual for November, and nothing that should have turned an entire region upside down. The storm intensified faster than captains could adjust, and by the time many of them realized how far it had broken from every familiar pattern, it was already too late. Waves began stacking without rhythm. Wind changes made no sense. A day that started manageable was shifting into something crews could not shape their decisions around. That was how three freighters, the Novadoc, the William B. Davock, and the Minch, found themselves trapped on a lake that was rewriting its own rules by the hour. Welcome to Shipwreck History. If you haven't already, hit the subscribe button and help support our channel. November 11, 1940, began with the usual unease. The kind mariners understood. The forecast had mentioned strengthening winds, which was typical for the season. The crews of the three freighters tracked their courses with November caution, and many ships along Lake Michigan made the same decision they often did. They stayed close to the eastern shore, hoping the shoreline would give them some protection if the weather turned rough. Far to the west, a low-pressure system was deepening at a rate that caught forecasters by surprise. Cold air from Canada met warmer southern air, with a level of force the Weather Bureau had not anticipated. The pressure drop was rapid, and the system's movement accelerated as it crossed the Midwest. Even before the captains noticed anything unusual, the physics of the storm had started to tilt into something unstable. The wind began rising earlier than expected, but nothing seemed alarming at first. Crews had sailed through worse. What changed was the speed of the intensification. The barometer kept falling, and waves began forming steeper patterns. Then, a wind shift changed everything. It pivoted sharply and hit the lake from a direction that exposed the nearshore vessels to the full reach of the storm. Captains who had hugged the coast found themselves facing an open stretch of water that no longer offered shelter. A route chosen for safety had become a trap. The men sailing that day depended entirely on the last forecast issued before departure. Weather technology in 1940 could not catch fast-moving cyclone development, and the regional Weather Bureau offices operated only during daytime hours. Forecasters in Chicago had closed their offices early the previous day, which was standard practice. When they returned on Monday morning, the storm was already spinning, far outside the track they had expected. The pressure readings were some of the lowest ever recorded in the region. Many vessels did not carry radios, especially older freighters. Once they left port, they relied on whatever weather information they had at the start of the trip. There were no tools to track sudden directional changes or identify rapid strengthening. Crews had no idea that the same storm system had torn down the Tacoma Narrows Bridge just days earlier. They didn't know that the storm had gained strength over the Rockies, instead of weakening. They made their way across Lake Michigan with outdated information, while the storm continued to evolve. The three freighters at the center of this story each encountered the storm in ways shaped by their position, design, and timing. They were not three separate events, they were three chapters in the same unfolding crisis. The Novadoc, a 250-foot steel freighter, was built in 1928 and carried a crew of 19. She sailed close to Michigan's shoreline on November 11th, a decision that normally offered a margin of safety. When the wind shifted, that margin collapsed. The storm pressed her toward deeper troughs, and the waves began hitting in heavy, uneven blows. Water smashed through the pilot house windows. The ship rolled hard, and attempts to turn her into the wind failed. The crew tried to regain control, but the lake was no longer following patterns they recognized. Soon the Novadoc grounded on a sandbar near Juniper Beach, south of Pentwater. The impact cracked her hull and split the electrical systems. Waves tore across the deck. 2 crewmen were swept overboard and lost. 17 crew members gathered in what remained of the pilot house. Furniture became firewood, and the men waited through the night as the storm kept pounding the wreck. Daylight brought crowds to the shoreline, watching a broken freighter still being hit by heavy surf, and survivors who had no way off. More than a day passed before a rescue attempt became possible. 3 Pentwater fishermen, Clyde Cross and his crew, fought their way toward the wreck. Working with Coast Guard personnel from the beach, they helped rig a breech's buoy line and brought the survivors ashore one at a time. The Novadoc would not last much longer. As the final crew member reached land, the wreck sagged deeper into the surf. She remained visible for weeks in pieces, slowly settling into the bottom. While the Novadoc broke apart near shore, other vessels farther out were dealing with a different threat. The storm intensified to a point where waves formed without consistent spacing or direction. Snow moved in thick bands, and visibility dropped until ships could barely see their own bows. Crews who had sailed the lakes for decades described conditions that felt unreal. The patterns they knew were gone, replaced by a storm that didn't follow logic. One freighter, the Wyandotte, fought through Saginaw Bay with waves rolling completely over her decks. A ship that normally covered miles with ease could barely make headway. The Car Ferry, City of Flint, was pushed onto a beach at Ludington when she tried to reach harbor. Other vessels reported steering failures, flooding, and damage simply from the force of repeated wave impacts. There was no way to navigate cleanly. Every decision under these conditions carried risk. For the Davock and the Minch, still in deeper water, the storm was about to reach a level neither crew could overcome. The William B. Davock was a 400-foot steel bulk carrier, launched in 1907. She was carrying coal toward Chicago as the storm intensified. Crews later reported last seeing her fighting the waves that afternoon, still under control, still upright, still powering forward. Something changed soon after. The cause of her sinking remained unknown until 2014 when divers finally documented the key detail on the wreck. The rudder had failed and locked into her propeller. That single mechanical failure took away both her steering and her propulsion. A large freighter could only survive the storm if she faced the waves head-on. With no maneuverability, she drifted broadside and rolled over. When she capsized, it happened quickly. No distress call was sent, no lifeboats launched. 32 men died within minutes as the Davock went down near Little Sable Point in over 200 feet of water. For more than 30 years, the location of the wreck remained unknown. When divers found her in 1972, lying upside down on the lake bed, the evidence was still visible. The wreck itself told the story that no survivor lived to share. The Annecy Minch, a steel freighter launched in 1903, was about 380 feet long and carrying a cargo of hardwood lumber. Captain Donald Kennedy sailed without a radio that day, following the morning's forecast and adjusting only by what the crew could see. As the wind shifted and waves gained height, the ship began to labor against the rolling force of the cargo. Lumber could shift easily, and the Minch was an older vessel already dealing with heavy strain. Witnesses along the shoreline later recalled seeing lights from a ship rising and disappearing behind massive waves south of Pentwater. The Minch was fighting the storm in deeper water, where the wave patterns were more chaotic. At some point during the night, her hull failed under the combined stress of the waves and shifting weight. She broke in two, both halves sank, and all 24 crew members were lost. The next day, bodies began washing up on beaches near Pentwater and Ludington. Some could be identified, others never were. The wreck now sits in sections, in relatively shallow water, where divers can still see the broken hull and intact boilers. When the storm passed, the scale of its impact across the Midwest became clearer. Along Michigan's shoreline, wreckage from multiple ships had washed ashore. Residents joined Coast Guard crews in recovery efforts. The beach is filled with debris, cargo, and the bodies of sailors who had no chance to reach land. 8 bodies from the Davock drifted to Ludington, identified by their life preservers. More were recovered near Pentwater. 3 sailors with no immediate identification were buried in Ludington's Lakeview Cemetery, where a monument now honors the unknown crew members and the men lost from the Davock and Minch. Across the region, the devastation extended far beyond the lake. In Minnesota, dozens of duck hunters died when temperatures plummeted and waves trapped them on islands. Farmers froze to death, crossing their own yards in whiteout conditions, and a massive number of livestock were lost. The storm caused 154 deaths across the Midwest, a number that reflected just how fast the weather had changed. The Weather Bureau faced intense scrutiny afterward, but the reality was simpler. The tools needed to track a storm that intensified this rapidly did not exist. Forecasting improvements would come in the years ahead, but in 1940, the gap between the storm's behavior and the available technology proved catastrophic. The Novadoc remains still rest in shallow water near Juniper Beach, where her broken hull is visible in sections. She is accessible to divers and even snorkelers in calm conditions. Her shape is fragmented, but enough structure remains to understand how she broke after grounding. The Davock lies upside down, in a few hundred feet of water in a preserved state that still reflects her final moments. Divers can see the rudder jammed against the propeller, along with scattered debris. It is one of the clearest examples of how a single mechanical failure can change everything during a storm. The Minch rests in two pieces in shallower water south of Pentwater. The split is visible, and her boilers remain largely intact. Divers who visit the wreck see the physical record of a ship pushed past its structural limits. Local communities continue to honor the men who were lost as a result of the storm. The Pentwater Historical Society preserves artifacts from the Novadoc. The Port of Ludington Maritime Museum includes a detailed exhibit on the storm, including a reconstruction of the Davock wheelhouse. These wrecks may lie at the bottom of Lake Michigan, but their stories remain part of the identity of the region and the people connected to the storm. The Armistice Day Storm revealed how fast a familiar lake can change. Crews trusted forecasts and experience, but the storm moved beyond both. The Novadoc, the Davock, and the Minch each encountered the same event in different ways, and all were overwhelmed by conditions that escalated with little warning. If you enjoyed this video, please like and share, and let us know in the comments what shipwrecks you want us to cover next. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss an upload. And until next time, keep exploring.